Son-in-Law of Discord by Disney Fanatic 2364. Chapter 10. Family Dinner. Half an hour later, Trixie, Moonbeam, Mothball, Twilight and Screwball were sitting at a picnic table, which Screwball had begrudgingly conjured, eating the fried chili peppers Trixie had prepared. Trixie sat between Moonbeam and Mothball on one side while Twilight and Screwball sat across, the latter wanting to be as far away from her ex-fiancé as possible. He was sending her a pleading look, only to get a deadly glare in return. He was pretty sure that she had a voodoo doll under the table, because every now and then, he would feel a prick on his flank. Trixie was sending glares to both Mothball and Twilight, while the alicorn was looking down at her plate, trying to ignore the tension. It would have been a quiet meal, had Moonbeam not been chatting excitedly away. "This is so much fun. We've never had anyone over for dinner before. Well, except for this one time when these two weird dudes showed up and wouldn't stop bowing to Mom and kept calling her the GAPT, and they kept going on and on about how great she was, and they wouldn't go away until the CMC, you know, that old band, dragged them away. What were their names, Mom? I think one of them was called Snail or something. So how you liking your peppers?" Trixie asked, though it was clear she was just desperate to change the subject. "They're delicious," Twilight piped. "Honestly," Mothball said as he cautiously touched a pepper with his hoof, "I'm not a big fan of chili peppers." He smiled nervously at Screwball. "You know, unless they're dipped in chocolate." She looked at him wearily and then gazed down at her dish. Mothball frowned and did the same. "Though I'm curious," Twilight told Trixie. "I thought I mean ponies of your kind didn't eat a lot of real food." "It varies," Trixie replied, popping a pepper into her mouth. "Chili peppers are very spicy, like," she smirked teasingly at the alicorn, "a certain kind of love." Twilight blushed and shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I, personally, prefer the sweet type," Mothball said, looking hopefully at Screwball. "Like a big old chocolate shake." She didn't respond, nor did she seem to acknowledge him. "Really?" he sighed. "You're gonna let me starve?" Screwball picked up her plate. "I'll take this inside." Mothball watched sadly as she vanished into the pink tent. He stood up to follow her when Twilight grabbed his hoof and looked at him sympathetically. "Give her time to cool down," she whispered. "Then you can both work things out." Mothball sighed and slowly sat back down. "So Princess Twilight," Moonbeam piped, seemingly oblivious to the recent drama, "Mom tells me you two know each other." "Oh, just Twilight's fine," the alicorn said with a smile. "And yes, you see, your mother came to Ponyville and said that." She trailed off when she noticed Trixie frantically shaking her head. Well, she was putting on quite a show and I was greatly impressed with her magic. Oh, and she also saved me from this Ursa Minor that was rampaging through town." Trixie blinked at Twilight's words while Moonbeam's eyes widened in delight. "Really? Mom, you saved a princess. Why didn't you tell me?" "Oh, but I wasn't a princess," Twilight started to say. "What other awesome things did Mom do?" "Oh, Moonbeam," Trixie said with a nervous smile, "you don't want to hear that boring stuff." "Typical Trixie," Twilight snorted. "Always so modest." "Don't push it," Trixie said through her teeth. "And how do you know Princess Twilight, Uncle Mothy?" Moonbeam inquired. "Oh," Mothball responded quietly. "I'm Screwball's godmother," Twilight finished for him. "She and Mothball asked me to help them find your mother so that she could." Trixie's eyes seemed to flash when they glared at the alicorn. "How can you not know you had a half-brother, Mom?" Moonbeam asked. "Mother had him after I left home," Trixie muttered. "Left home? You told me Grandma died." Trixie froze for a second. Mothball came up with a quick fib. "She did. Just, after she left and a short time before you were born." Oh, Moonbeam said, though she was still staring at her mother suspiciously. So hey, Uncle Mothy, how come you're still hiding yourself? I mean we all know what you are, so. Mothball uttered, glancing around nervously, I'm not really comfortable with showing myself in public. Ah, come on. No ponies around. I would change now but that only happens when I sneeze. Ooh. But I can show you something else cool. Trixie gasped as Moonbeam's hoof went to her hat. Moonbeam Insectra Lulamoon, don't you dare. The filly shrank at her mother's outburst and slowly lowered her hoof. Twilight looked back down at her dish and whistled innocently. Mothball heaved a heavy sigh as he tried to enjoy his food. He was beginning to miss mealtime with Screwball's family. Meanwhile, at the Castle of Chaos, Twinkle and Zany were engaged in an ultimate food fight. Eat my cheesy carrots! Zany yelled, summoning mini catapults to fling said cheese-covered carrots. Twinkle tried to dodge but let out a shriek as one grazed her ear. You'll pay for that! She exclaimed, slamming her hoof on the table. Zany yelped as Twinkle's silverware hurled towards him. He ducked as they stuck to the back of his chair. He rose and growled as his bowl of nacho cheese began taking a monstrous form. Children, stop it! Fluttershy commanded. I've told you a million times, Zany, turn that cheese back to normal. Twinkle, put down that chair. Kids. Discord only watched with weary eyes. Usually he would take pleasure in such a chaotic display, but his heart wasn't in it. His recent encounter with Chrysalis had put him in a stale state, and he also worried about Screwball. He knew she could protect herself out there, but if she and the others failed to find the changeling princess, she might lose her true love. He knew all too well what that was like and didn't want Screwball to go through the same painful experience. That was probably why he was always so shaky about her relationship with Mothball. He just didn't want his little girl to get hurt. Then a voice inside his head told him she would be fine. Mothball was a good boy, though Discord rarely admitted that out loud. He would never hurt her intentionally. Still, if the boy had to choose duty over desire, Discord worried what effect that would have on Screwball. Well, good night, Trixie said bluntly after clearing up the dishes. Maybe you can join us for breakfast tomorrow. Moonbeam said excitedly to their guests. We can have strawberries and whipped cream. Moonbeam. Go inside. The filly groaned and obeyed her mother. Before she went in, however, she waved to Twilight and Mothball. See ya tomorrow. Once she was sure her daughter was out of hearing, Trixie turned to Twilight. Hey, thanks for telling Moonbeam all that good stuff about Trixie, but you didn't have to. The alicorn held up her hoof. It wasn't my place to tell her of your past. However, it's only a matter of time before she finds out the truth. The question is, who is going to be the one to tell her? Trixie rolled her eyes. Don't lecture Trixie, Twilight. If you were a mother, you'd understand. Actually, I am a mother. I have a 3-year-old filly at home. The unicorn snorted. Nevertheless, Trixie still had more experience than you. She stomped into the wagon and slammed the door behind her. Twilight shook her head in pity. Hey, Mothball uttered, could you maybe talk to Screwy for me? The alicorn smiled softly as she laid a hoof on his shoulder. I'll soften her up a bit, but you should think about what you are going to say to her. The changeling nodded in thanks and went into his tent. Twilight lifted the flap to hers and found Screwball in one of the bedrooms, curled up on a queen-sized bed covered with a purple comforter. The alicorn sighed as she cautiously approached her. Screwy. She started to say. I'm not talking to him. Screwball snapped. You heard what he said. He doesn't think I love him enough. I'm sure he didn't mean. Does he really think that? She demanded, sitting up. I mean after all I've done for him. When we were first getting to know each other, I disobeyed my parents, sneaking out to meet him every night. When he left the hive, I convinced my parents to let him stay with us. Did I mention we faced a changeling army together? Yet you're not willing to make changes for him. He wants me to become an entirely new species. That's a lot to ask from some pony. It is, but if it's necessary for the two of you to be together, isn't it worth the risk? Screwball bit her lip. Well. Twilight sighed and sat on the bed. Love requires sacrifice. You know I gave up my immortality so I could be with Flash, right? I still can't believe you did that, Screwball muttered, because you know that means I'll have one less aunt around when I'm like 1001, right? And yet I would outlive Flash by many eons. Why didn't you just ask him to be immortal? Daddy did that with Mom. That came to mind, but it only worked on your mother because Discord had a strong emotional connection with her. You do realize that's another example of sacrifice, right? Your parents had the option of making Fluttershy immortal, having Discord relinquish his own immortality, or leaving well enough alone so that he may outlive her. Your mother made the choice of living for eternity with your father, even though that meant she would outlive all her friends. She knew she couldn't just let the last Draconequus in the world die. Twilight hung her head. And you've seen what would happen if Discord ever lost Fluttershy. Screwball nodded. Okay, so you and Mom have made big decisions for the ones you love. You saying I should be okay with becoming a changeling? I'm not telling you what to do, Screwy, but think about the sacrifices Mothball has made for you. He left the only family he has ever known behind so he could be with you, and has now traveled to the ends of Equestria so you wouldn't have to change yourself. Heck, he even had enough guts to put up living with your family. Don't you think it's time you returned the favor? Screwball stared at her godmother for a moment and then laid her head back down, facing away from her. The decision is yours, Twilight continued, but you can't leave this conflict between you and Mothball unresolved. Flash and I made that mistake once and it nearly destroyed us. Think about it. She heard the alicorn rise from the bed and trot away. Screwball's face fell as she looked at her left hoof. It looked so bare without Mothball's ring. She thought about what he said he had done to get the ring. He had worked so hard to get her something special, and every time she had given him something special, it was something she had poofed out of thin air with no effort whatsoever. He had abandoned his crown, his family, his life. What had she ever done for him? Asterisk. Come on, Mom. Moonbeam complained as she sat on the bed, trying to get her boots off. Why can't they join us for breakfast? They'll be gone before then, her mother replied as she put the dishes away. If they know what's good for them. I don't get it, Mom. A princess, a magic earth pony and a long-lost relative show up out of the blue. How can you not be excited? We have new friends, and those ponies are not our friends, Moonbeam. You have no idea why they even came here. Then why don't you tell me? Trixie winced. It doesn't matter. Besides, they're gonna be gone before. Mom, I think these things are stuck. Trixie turned to see her daughter having a hard time prying off the boots. Even when she used magic, they wouldn't budge. Trixie smirked as she approached her. Hold still. She lit up her horn and gently removed the boots one by one. Moonbeam sighed in relief as she flexed her black cloven hooves. Trixie's pink aura then enveloped the filly's pants and slid them off. Moonbeam stood on the bed and swished her thin, cow-like tail with a small tuft of dark and light blue hair much like her mane. Trixie then removed the baseball cap and Moonbeam touched the point of her grey horn as if to check it was still there. Phew! She heaved. Much better. I think that stuff's gotten too small for me. All right, we'll go shopping tomorrow, Trixie said as she hung up her cape. You know, I think the princess and Uncle Mothy would have understood if I had. Stop calling him that. But I'm sure they've seen weirder things. They would not have understood. But Now get into bed. Moonbeam groaned as she and her mother crawled into their small bed and pulled the old blanket over their bodies. It's been a long day, Trixie said, wrapping her hooves around her daughter. Let's get some sleep. Could you at least tell me a story? Moonbeam asked as she snuggled against her mother. She sighed. Okay, Once upon a time, there was a princess, who wanted nothing more than to please her mother, the queen. However, the queen didn't think her daughter was good enough, and so she banished her. Years later, a pony from the princess's old kingdom found her and told her that the queen was dead and she was next in line for the throne. But, she couldn't accept it. How come? Trixie sighed. She had made a new life for herself and didn't want it ruined. So then what happened? She turned away. She died. Moonbeam rolled her eyes. You really need to tell better stories, Mom. They all end the same. Well, that's all I've got. Now go to sleep. It didn't take long for Moonbeam to doze off, but Trixie's eyes remained wide awake. She watched her daughter as she slept and smiled slightly at her innocence. She brushed the filly's mane aside and frowned at the grey, bony horn sticking out of her head. Every odd part of her, those parts that never changed no matter what form she took, would always be a terrible reminder of him, and of the decision she had made long ago. She quickly rearranged her daughter's mane so the horn wouldn't be visible. Trixie's eyes wandered around the wagon and fell upon the mirror leaning against the wall. She could see her reflection, or rather the reflection of her disguise. She remembered the first time she had seen that reflection, the day she had left home, the day the great and powerful Trixie had been born. Then, after a quick glance at Moonbeam to make sure she was sound asleep, she changed. Just for a moment, to look at the changeling she had left behind. Her purple eyes now had slits, her hair was now green and stringy, and her body was now black and deformed. She shook her head and quickly changed back. She smiled at the unicorn in the mirror, turned back to her daughter and closed her eyes. As she dreamt, memories of the past came flooding back. Author's note. I did warn you updates might not be as frequent. I was planning to keep Moonbeam's oddities a secret for longer, but I wanted a moment where Trixie and Moonbeam react differently to them. A lot of you complained about how Screwball acted in the last chapter. Come on, she's not perfect. Next chapter will take a while, but I will tell you that you will learn more about Bellatrix/Trixie in it. End author's note. End chapter 10. Family dinner.